Hello everyone. If you are new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do it, thanks. By the way, I also have a Luffy fan fiction channel. If you are interested, the link is in the description.
Team 8 by Starcan. What if Naruto had been selected for a different team? What if he'd had a different mentor? Who would guess the consequences would be so large? Adios.
Chapter 23 6 months. A little over 180 days. Jiraiya sighed as he and his new apprentice made their way down the forest trail. It wasn't nearly enough. When he first entertained thoughts of taking Naruto on a training trip, he was picturing a sabbatical of 3 or so years. Enough time to work at a reasonable pace. Enough time to introduce new subjects one at a time, to let the brat work at his own pace. He didn't want to be rushed. While it wouldn't hurt to have time for some leisure activities and maybe a bit of writing, he also wanted a chance to get to know his godson. 3 years also might give them time to disappear from Akatsuki's radar, or at least figure out what the hell they were up to. Instead, he asked for a fraction of the time he really wanted. Naruto was hesitant enough to leave the village for 6 months, and Jiraiya knew he would balk at longer. As it was, he was surprised Tsunade agreed as easily as she did. Maybe it worked out with her plans for the Hyuga girl. It also meant being back just in time for the next Chunin examination, and maybe get the boy the promotion he'd been cheated out of. Finally, Hinata would be busy training under Tsunade, and more importantly, isolated from her father. Knowing that kept the brat agreeable. The toad hermit knew heartbreak well enough not to wish it on anyone else. Jiraiya shook his head. There was so much he needed to teach the brat. Of course, the list was a little shorter than it might have been, he mused sourly, ignoring the stab of disappointment in his gut. He'd hoped to convince Naruto to go ahead and sign the toad contract anyway, now that he wasn't on a team with the Aburame anymore. That hope was dashed less than an hour away from Konoha, when he first broached the subject. It was irrational, but he couldn't help but feel betrayed when the little snot announced that he'd signed the turtle contract. He ground his teeth. Turtles. That sense of betrayal dulled a little when he realized that Naruto still considered himself a part of Team 8, and probably always would. He couldn't really resent that. It's not like he didn't still have feelings, unresolved or not, for his own teammates. Tsunade could have anything from him if she asked sincerely. And Orochimaru, that betrayal still burned in his soul. Worse, if Uchiha Kuranai was correct, Team 8 were Naruto's first friends his age. And that was his own fault, he supposed. He'd accepted Sarutobi-sensei's assurances and done what was best for Konoha, instead of what was best for his godson. Not that it was all the old man's fault either. His own grief made him far too quick to accept a long-term assignment. Watching over a baby was far beyond his skills, let alone a baby with Minato's hair color and Kushina's mouth and jawline. But he could have done it. The boy survived, but he could have personally made sure Naruto had someone to turn to as he grew up. Instead, he failed him just as badly as the Hokage and most of the other villagers. Like all the other so-called fucking adults in Konoha, until his last academy instructor and that Kami sent Jonin-sensei. With an effort, he worked to let go of his regrets and focused on the positives. Uchiha Kuranai was one of the most irritating women Jiraiya had ever met, and he considered Tsunade a friend, so that was saying a lot. But damned if she wasn't exactly what Naruto needed. Her students didn't exactly worship the ground she walked on, but it was close with Naruto and the Hyuga girl, Hinata. When she called him onto the carpet after discovering he was Naruto's godfather, he let her do it because she was right. She'd done a better job of godparent than Naruto's own godfather, so she earned that right. No matter Hokage's orders or the threat of Akatsuki, she was the one who stepped up and put his godson on the right path. There was no telling how messed up Naruto would be now if not for her. That was why he was going to honor her requests. Every single silly one. No sake for 6 months might very well kill him, in which case her afterlife was going to be a constant litany of "I told you so," sung by a celestial toad chorus. Ushizune wasn't quite sure what to make of her new kohai, or junior student. She'd been impressed that anyone, let alone a Hyuga, was willing to give up so much for a teammate. She knew Tsunade would never hold her to that vow. Managing herself, Shizune, and Tun was as much responsibility as the Sannin could bear, but Hinata had no way of knowing that when she bargained for Naruto's treatment. Of course, that surprise was dwarfed by a recovered patient tricking her master into returning to Konoha. Well, the legendary sucker losing a bet wasn't surprising, but a genin maneuvering her into a situation where her horrible luck, or horrible temper, played against her, that was new. And now she would be working with his best friend, eldest daughter of the leader of the prestigious Hyuga clan, who willingly placed herself in indentured servitude for 6 months to heal a clan-less orphan. She was still trying to wrap her head around that one. The first day of anatomy review, Shizune was surprised by how focused the younger girl was. The lack of squeamishness she supposed might have been fostered by the stoic Hyuga upbringing. Genin that hadn't been blooded in warfare usually showed more reaction when viewing internal organs for the first time. Maybe she was used to seeing them with her Byakugan. But that didn't explain how Shizune was the first to call for a break after 5 hours of intensive review. She fully expected Hinata to show some signs of fatigue or wandering attention before then. But the girl was eerily calm and focused on her words the entire time. It was unnerving. And when it came time to review, Hinata repeated everything back, nearly word for word. And then she asked questions. They were good questions, building on what she'd been shown, but not the kind of questions Shizune was expecting so soon. After a week of this, she spoke to Tsunade. Whatever reaction she was expecting from her sensei, and now Hokage, it wasn't an aggravated frown and a long-suffering sigh. "Hokage-sama?" she asked in as respectful a tone as possible. "I'm going to kill Jiraiya," she growled. That was far from the first time Shizune had heard those words, but for once she couldn't see how this could possibly be the Toad Hermit's fault. "What did he do?" she finally asked. Tsunade sighed. "It's karma. I made fun of him one too many times when we met up after he started teaching Minato Fuinjutsu. I laughed at how perturbed he was to realize that he was teaching someone who would surpass him. Now it's going to happen to me, eventually, anyway." Shizune blinked. What makes you say that?" While Shizune herself had a lot of expertise with poisons, Tsunade was widely acknowledged as the foremost medical expert ever born. Even people that hated her acknowledged her skill. Tsunade opened her desk drawer and fished out a bottle. "It's practically a perfect combination. Hinata has developed ridiculous stamina for her age and gender, her chakra control is in the top percentile, and it's water-natured. Those damn eyes of hers are a diagnostician's dream, and now you tell me she has the brains for it as well. And as for motivation," she grimaced as she broke the seal on the bottle, then continued, "I asked her, on the way back to Konoha, why she agreed to be my servant. Do you know what she said?" Shizune shook her head. "She said that some of the worst moments of her life were watching Naruto suffering when she couldn't help him," Tsunade said. "That is not the answer I would expect, given some of the things I've heard about her father, but there it was. Best damn motivation to go into medicine that I ever heard of." Shizune silently watched her master take a drink, but shook her head when offered a sip. She didn't really even have the heart to remonstrate her about it. It was late, and she did not often hear Tsunade so engrossed in the problems of others. It was, she felt, a change for the Betty Metal sent sparks dancing before Shino dropped back into a guard stance, calm as at the ready. Tenten grinned as she spun the butterfly swords in her hands. He had seen the weapon specialist from Team Guy perform in the preliminary matches of the last Chunin examination. Unfortunately, she had an extremely poor matchup with a Suna wind user that resulted in a quick elimination. He hadn't thought about her again until Hinata brought it up during one of their team lunches. It was not the same without the presence of Uzumaki Naruto, but he had no desire to lose contact with his remaining teammate. His absence also allowed for a slightly more varied choice in lunchtime fare. Hinata was still getting up early each day and working with Guy and Lee on both physical conditioning and taijutsu. The improvements in both strength and agility were subtle, but the expansions to her chakra capacity were clearly evident to his allies. Merely sitting in close proximity would stir his hives as they sensed the foreign chakra. In idle moments Shino sometimes wondered, if circumstances were different, if this might have translated into a physical and/or emotional attraction. Not that this was in any way a fruitful topic to pursue. It was during one of these morning sessions that Tenten arrived for a little live target practice with Lee and Hinata. As they were cooling down afterward, Tenten lamented a lack of qualified sparring partners. Hinata knew from previous conversations that Shino was also seeking more weapon stylists to practice against. It wasn't long before the two met with live steel in their hands. While Tenten wanted to master multiple weapons, Shino was only interested in practicing the kama techniques he had learned from his mother. It still worked out well for both, since his time was split between weapons practice and working with his Kikai bugs. Tenten got to work out with a variety of weapons, and Shino got to practice defending against a variety of weapons. Not that this was in any way easy. After replacing his jacket for the 5th time, his mother insisted Shino be fitted for a reinforced model. Ikutaro of Wave, the tailor that improved Naruto's uniform, was more than happy to have Shino try out some new concepts for his new shinobi wear trademark line. Now his jacket had leather strips sewn under the outer edges of his forearms and upper arms, with a single link of fine chakra-treated chain embedded. It would likely part under a direct hit, but it might slow the hypothetical blade down enough to prevent amputation. Shino did know that it cut down on the nicks and excessive wear and tear that free sparring was placing on his wardrobe. It was also light enough to not slow him down, so he asked for similar treatment on his trousers. The material being fire retardant was a further bonus. He could also say, with some veracity, that he could make it exceedingly difficult for anyone to score a direct hit on him. Practicing with Tenten also yielded a secondary benefit. It gave him a much-needed distraction when he was assigned to work with Team Guy for a mission. It was disturbing to discover that Naruto's depictions of the assorted fires of youth antics were not actually exaggerated in any way. When there was sufficient leisure time for Guy and Lee to start exclaiming, the rest of them quickly sought any possible form of distraction. To be honest, things were rather tense at first between himself and Hyuga Neji. Unlike Naruto, Shino had been denied any cathartic release from the issues that arose during the Chunin exam. Initially, the only thing staying his hand was a desire to remain professional and bring no shame to the teachings of his former sensei. The second was Hinata's testimony during a shared luncheon that her cousin had turned over a new leaf. The final factor was Hyuga Neji himself. He was unusually taciturn during their first mission together. It was a simple D rank requested, so they could all get to know each other, as Maida Guy put it. However, Neji's behavior lacked some of the haughtiness that Shino had expected. Furthermore, at the end of their day, Neji bowed and asked Shino if he was in contact with Hinata. When Shino nodded, Neji asked, in the most humble manner possible, if he could delay leaving for a moment and do him a favor. Shino acceded to this request mainly out of curiosity. He was intrigued when Neji pulled out writing supplies and penned a quick note to his cousin, then asked Shino if he would mind giving it to Hinata at his earliest opportunity. Hinata herself was very happy to receive the missive, and was nearly reduced to tears by the news from her home. She asked Shino if he minded relaying a reply, and of course he agreed. Curiously, Neji read the reply twice over, then set it alight with a regretful frown and composed his own missive. There were 3 repetitions of this cycle before Shino broke down and asked Neji why he destroyed Hinata's messages. The somewhat chilling answer was that Neji could not afford for Hiyashi to see one of them and know he was in contact with Hinata. Fortunately, Shino's missions with Team 10 were less stressful. While Sarutobi Asuma was far more laissez-faire than Shino was used to, Choji continued the friendliness displayed after their match during the Chunin exam, and Shikamaru was a stimulating conversationalist. The less said about Ino the better. While superficially attractive, Shino found himself comparing her to Hinata in a singularly unfavorable fashion. Sometimes, he wondered if he was measuring the blonde genin by an unreasonable standard. Team 7 was another matter. They had worked together well in the Forest of Death, under very adverse circumstances. However, Uchiha Sasuke displayed signs of intense unease when Shino was around. Finally, Sakura took it upon herself to explain that Sasuke tended to take responsibility for events far beyond the scope of his capabilities. Specifically, he felt uneasy because of his brother Itachi and the role the rogue ninja played in Kurenai-sensei's death. Shino was somewhat offended that he was believed capable of such irrational blaming behavior and made that clear to the last Uchiha. After that, they settled into an uneasy détente, united in their mutual desire to end Itachi, but ultimately competing to see who would have the honor of achieving that goal. It also did not help that their sensei appeared to derive no small pleasure in pitting him against Sasuke or Kiba whenever the opportunity arose. At least his observations, not rants. Rants were irrational. His observations, shared with Hinata during their shared meals, seemed to provide no small amount of entertainment for his teammate. And they were far more appropriate mealtime conversation than her studies of various diseased internal organs. Naruto glared at the barely stable spinning ball of chakra floating above his open palm. He couldn't believe it had taken over a week to get this stupid jutsu to work right. Okay, the Rinnegan looked kind of cool, and it was sort of neat to learn one of the 4th Hokage's techniques, but it was tricky as hell to get right. He normally wasn't this slow getting a jutsu down, and Ero Sennin looked pretty perturbed when he showed him he'd finally got it right. To his credit, Jiraiya didn't blame him out loud, or call him out for slacking. But Naruto didn't want the old guy to take it too easy on him. There were only a few months before Hinata's apprenticeship was over and he needed to be back in Konoha. He ground his teeth as he walked. He needed to be ready for anything. The next Chunin exam, like Jiraiya had hinted about, Itachi, who could show up tomorrow. The Rinnegan began to spin faster, expanding and contracting in time with Naruto's pulse. He scowled and focused his will, feeling for any fragments of red chakra circulating into his arm. The spiraling sphere spun even faster, but stabilized, forming a glowing blue aura as a barely perceptible whine filled the air. "Is there anything else I can do with it?" Naruto asked. Out of sight behind his student, Jiraiya there in gleeful anticipation. There was no way in hell he was letting this boy miss the next Chunin exam. He said the Hyuga girl had helped him with his chakra control, but he hadn't expected this. He'd picked up other jutsu, like Swamp of the Underworld, with unnatural speed, but the Rinnegan, well, that was on a whole other level. It took a conscious effort to downplay the surge of triumph he'd just experienced. Kumo wasn't going to know what hit them. Training with his new summons was interesting, but not as straightforward as Naruto originally thought. From the way Jiraiya talked, he thought he'd be expected to present himself to the boss turtle as soon as he could summon the chakra. He learned a few things were different after his first night on the road. At Jiraiya's suggestion, Naruto worked with his summons mainly between eating dinner and going to sleep. The old man still seemed a little miffed that he'd accepted Guy-sensei's contract, but to Naruto this seemed like the ideal solution for everyone. Guy got to pass his contract onto someone acceptable, and Naruto didn't need to worry about his summons eating Shino or his bugs. Naruto twisted his fingers into the appropriate seals, and then focused the smallest amount of chakra he could manage into the technique. There was a poof of smoke, and when it cleared he saw a small blue turtle about the size of his hand. He frowned. This didn't match the description of any of the first-tier summons the guy had described. Naruto carefully picked up the blue turtle and peered at its face as it retracted. "Do you have a name?" he asked. "Or, can you talk?" His response was a face full of water blasting out of the turtle's shell. Naruto flinched back, sputtering, aiming the deluge away from his face, but still being careful not to drop the summoned turtle. He ignored the guffaws coming from Arrow Senen's direction. Sorry, I guess you don't like being picked up," he stammered. The flow cut off as soon as it was pointed away from Naruto. He put the turtle back down and wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. The legs and head slowly re-emerged and the turtle began slowly walking around. Naruto frowned as he ran his fingers through his wet hair. Jiraiya was still laughing. "Very useful. I don't think the toads ever managed to spit in my face." Naruto smiled. "There's too much water," he exclaimed. "What do you mean?" Jiraiya asked, still chuckling a little. "That's more water than he could possibly contain inside that shell," Naruto clarified. "It must have used a jutsu, like that condensation one I know, to generate all that water." He watched as the summons chewed on the leaves of a small shrub near Naruto's bedroll. "Even the smallest ones can use chakra and some jutsu," he added. "That's a bit of an assumption," Jiraiya objected, looking skeptical. "Maybe, but it's possible," Naruto allowed. He smiled as the turtle spat out a half-chewed leaf and promptly disappeared in a puff of vapor. Naruto fed a lot more chakra into the technique the second time. This time, when the mists cleared, he saw a small, vaguely turtle-shaped figure with a bright green shell that came up to his knee at the highest point. "Genji?" Naruto asked after a moment. "That's me," a low voice replied as the shell slowly pivoted. "You must be Uzumaki Naruto, the new summoner made guy told my cousin about," he said after a moment. "I'm glad I got you this time," Naruto admitted. "My first attempt I got a small blue turtle that wouldn't talk and spat water at me." "Ah, we call him Squirtle, he's new," Genji replied. "He doesn't talk yet." "Oh," Naruto said, ignoring the snickering coming from Jiraiya's direction. "Guy-sensei said there might be additional requests made by the first summons I spoke to. He said he could not tell what they would be, just that they were not always the same." Genji murmured, his head half retracting into the shell. "I have no secondary stipulations. I'm not allowed." "Why not?" Naruto asked. Well, it did not turn out well with the last summoner," Genji admitted after a long pause. "I really thought I was doing him a favor. He was so serious." The voice trailed off into hollow echoes as the head pulled back even further. Then Naruto heard a soft sigh, and Genji's head re-emerged. "I do need to warn you, however." "Warn me about what?" "We turtles are a tribe that prize wisdom above all else. When it says in the contract that we will be summoned in honor, it hinges on your true motivations, Uzumaki Naruto." "In what way, Genji-san?" "Think about your worst enemy, Uzumaki Naruto, the one you despise above all others." Naruto briefly considered Orochimaru, the way he'd hurt both Hinata and Oji-sama, but then he froze. Itachi. He couldn't completely suppress a burst of killing intent that silenced all the nearby nightlife. "I see you were thinking of them," Genji continued. "If you were to summon one of us to fight them, to kill this enemy, could you do it dispassionately? Could you truly say that you did so with no hate in your heart?" "No, but Itachi has a lot of blood on his hands," Naruto growled. "He killed almost his entire clan, even the children. He killed Kuranai-sensei." Genji's dark eyes blinked and he let out a mournful sigh. "I do not say that your hate is without cause, Uzumaki Naruto, but be wary. Hate and anger can also warp your perceptions of right and wrong. They can help you rationalize actions you normally would not take. If you embrace them too closely, they can turn you into a monster." Naruto clenched his fists, but didn't say anything. Genji's words were similar to something Kuranai-sensei had once said. He would think on them, even if it was painful. He nodded. "I can sense your pain," Genji added in a softer tone. "This Itachi has hurt you deeply and the wound still aches. I won't tell you to discard your anger, but instead be on guard against it. In the past, our summoner forgot this, to their sorrow." "What do you mean?" Naruto asked cautiously. "In the act of some," Genji explained, "a link is formed between us. Through that link, we can see into you, to know why we are summoned. Some a turtle for an evil purpose goes against our very nature. We are wisdom. We are patience. We are enduring strength. But we will not see that strength misused. So if I was to summon a bigger turtle so I could, say, spy on the women's baths?" Naruto asked speculatively. Genji's head turned so he was staring directly at Jiraiya. "I would not advise it. The misadventures of the Toad Sage are well known. But Gamabunta and his spawn indulge him because Jiraiya of the Sannin gives them more respect than he gives to anyone else. The toads have not always been esteemed among the others, so naturally they value respect above all else. Drinking with their leader is symbolic of this." Naruto nodded, ignoring the outraged scowl on Arrow Senen's face. "But as I said," Genji continued, "that is not our way. In ages past, an arrogant summoner ordered our leader to destroy a small fortification occupied by a rebellious clan. He did not care that the rebels' cause was just, only that his leader had ordered their destruction. The youngest clan member was a small child, innocent and pure. The summoner's wicked demands broke the contract and the friend of all children turned upon him and destroyed his entire army. That child then inherited the contract and began the lineage that ends now with you, Uzumaki Naruto. Hey, maybe I was right, Jiraiya muttered. Maybe they really were originally an Iwa contract. I'll have to ask Fukasaku if he knows. How will I know if my motivations are pure enough? Naruto asked. This was a lot more complex than he thought it would be. He hoped he hadn't made a mistake accepting Guy's offer. You must weigh your options in battle dispassionately, Uzumaki Naruto, Genji replied. Passion isn't always dangerous to thought, but it often impedes clear thinking. When you are centered and focused you will know if you are on the path of wisdom. Remember Tians. Calling upon us for defense is usually more easily justified. Naruto nodded, a little relieved. This wasn't too different than some of the things Kurenai-sensei had tried to pound into his head. Jiraiya had them traveling slowly in order to keep a low profile, but it was not without purpose. The Toad Sage was still a Konoha spymaster, and he needed to check up on his network of contacts. Naruto didn't want to be left behind wherever they were camping, so he made a point of keeping his ears open and his mouth shut during these meetings. He also didn't object to hair dyes or any other sort of disguises Jiraiya said their cover story required. It was actually kind of fascinating how the old man dropped his normally flamboyant persona and donned a new one like he was changing clothes. He also felt grudging respect for the old pervert. No one familiar with his normal behavior would think to associate his alternate identities with the infamous Toad Hermit. Of course, that begged the question of who the old man really was. Was the man he called Ero Sennin just another mask? When he worked up the courage to ask one night on the road, Jiraiya just set his supper aside, threw his head back, and laughed. What the hell kind of question is that? Who cares which one is the real me? Who knows if there even is such a thing? I'm having fun with it and I'm not hurting anyone that isn't an enemy of Konoha. What more can you ask from life? Naruto stared at his teacher and realized that his simple joy was not a ruse. Look kid, Jiraiya continued in a slightly more sober tone, I figured out long ago that I needed to make peace with myself and accept who I am. My teammates didn't, and look where it got them. He grimaced. One tried her damnedest to drown her sorrows in a lake of sake and the other one turned into a monster. You don't have any regrets? Naruto asked, his throat threatening to close for some reason. Jiraiya grimaced like he was in physical pain. Of course I do. You ignoramus, he sighed. Especially you. Well, look. You can't live without any regrets, because no one can live a perfect life and make nothing but correct decisions. But you have to accept that mistakes happen. Learn from them, and then let them go. Don't let them eat you up inside. Don't let them make you live a life of hesitations, because that's no life at all. How'd I let them go, sensei? Naruto asked. It was probably the first time he'd used the term with Jiraiya and meant it so much. That's not so easy, the man replied after a moment. What is your biggest regret? Kurenai-sensei. Naruto choked out. Jiraiya's eyes widened in surprise. And not having her as my sensei, Naruto added quickly. It's just, the last time I saw her, alive, I didn't say anything. What should you have said? Jiraiya coaxed. How much she helped me, how much I appreciate her teachings, how much I will miss her. Naruto choked out. Hinata said losing her mother was the worst pain she can remember, but this, I feel like she's the closest thing to a mother you ever had? Jiraiya asked in a tired voice. Naruto nodded. He hunched over a little as he sat in front of the campfire, arms folded across his aching stomach. He didn't even notice Jiraiya standing up, and jumped a little when the larger man plopped down next to him in front of the campfire. He jumped even more when hard knuckles wrapped the top of his head. You're an idiot, you know that, right? Jiraiya asked. It was evidently a rhetorical question because he didn't wait for an answer. Do you really think she didn't know? The way she talked about you. I've seen mothers less into discussing their children. She was always talking about her team. She took the expectations for John and Sensei leaders and blew right past them. Well, not in objectivity, maybe. I don't think she could have cared more if she was your biological mother. Do you really think so? Naruto asked. That you are an idiot? Jiraiya clarified. Absolutely. You're one screwed up kid. Naruto scowled. Is that why you regret bringing me on this training trip? He asked sarcastically. What? Jiraiya asked. No, wait, you mean my regrets? When I said you, I meant I regret how you grew up. Jiraiya sighed and scrubbed a big hand across his face. Let me explain. I knew your parents long before you were born. Before you ask, I can't tell you too much about them. Not yet. Hokage's orders. But there is a reason. Jiraiya paused and took a sip of his tea. Naruto thought he looked like he wanted something stronger. I knew them well enough that they asked me to look out for you if something happened to them. I'm your godfather, Naruto. Naruto realized his fists were clenched when the nails dug into his palms hard enough to draw blood. He bit back the angry words that wanted to fly from his mouth. "Why am I only just now meeting you?" he asked in quiet voice. He didn't think he'd given voice to the sense of betrayal he was feeling right then, but Jiraiya still flinched. "When the fox was sealed in you," Jiraiya replied, "you stopped being just my responsibility. You became Konoha's responsibility and the Hokage had the final word. A lot of people wanted you killed as soon as it was safe, but he would have none of that. He convinced me you would be safer as a ward of Konoha, just another orphan to our enemies. Obviously things didn't go like they should. I don't think he anticipated so many people trying to work around his secret law." Jiraiya sighed. "He sent me out to check on our enemies, to make sure no one planned to capitalize on our misfortune. Fortunately, most of them were too busy trying to figure out what happened to the Kyuubi to start any mischief." "And then?" Naruto prompted. "You seem to be doing okay without me," Jiraiya said. "Hokage sent word you were well and had joined the academy. They can teach the basics as well as I can, and I still had enemies. Still do, as a matter of fact. Only now Akatsuki seems to be after you, so it's either in the walk or in the fire." "Akatsuki?" Naruto asked. "The ones in the black robes with the red clouds that I've been asking about. Itachi is one of them." Naruto vaguely recalled the robes Itachi and Kisame wore, wondering why a secretive order of rogue ninjas would choose to wear such an obvious uniform. One chilling realization was that maybe they did so because they were just that good. He shuddered a little. "Anyway, yes, I regret not doing things differently," Jiraiya continued after another sip of tea and a grimace. "But I'm not going to wallow in it. And now I have an opportunity to make up for it a little by turning you into the scariest little bastard Kumo has ever seen." "What's that about Kumo?" "That's the village hosting the next Chunin examination," Jiraiya explained. "I intend to have you ready to win the damn thing if Tsunade sends you, your team." Naruto blinked. "Do you think she will?" Jiraiya leered. "I think I can talk her into it if she can bet on the outcomes." Ooh, if there was one thing Naruto learned from being friends with Hyuga Hinata, it was that talking about upsetting things tended to make them less upsetting. He needed to talk about what he'd learned from Jiraiya, and Genji was a good listener. That thought brought its own stab of guilt as Naruto realized why Jiraiya was so upset about him not signing the Toad contract. The next time he summoned Genji for their post-dinner lesson, it was in a clearing a short distance away from the campfire. The turtle nodded solemnly as Naruto explained what he'd learned and tried to articulate what he felt about the whole mess. After he was done, Genji hummed to himself for a while before standing up. "Turtles do not have godfathers," Genji began. "It's not a custom amongst our kind. But the Toad Hermit told you of an obligation he accepted toward you before you were even born, yes?" Naruto nodded. "But perhaps due to the events surrounding your birth, he was not able to meet that obligation. Before today, did you even know?" Naruto shook his head. "Then you are richer in some ways than you were yesterday, even if you were only enjoying that wealth belatedly. Your godfather is a master spy, yes?" Naruto nodded. "Such a person does not reveal secrets by accident, do they? He wanted you to know of this obligation, and willingly told you of his own failure. That speaks better of him than his reputation would suggest. I think the course of wisdom is to count your blessings, Naruto. You are better off than you were yesterday by the amount of one godfather, even if he is of questionable character." Naruto snorted. Misato frowned as she expertly twirled the baton in her hand, her fingers little more than a blur. "It doesn't appear to have affected the balance any," she said. She squeezed a concealed trigger and a razor-sharp blade folded out of the haft, locking in place with a click. Nodding, she picked up its mate and spun the pair through an extremely complex kata. Air whistling past the blades was the only sound for more than a minute. Finally, she stopped and carefully folded the blades back into the batons, before handing them to her son. The necessary modifications were minute enough that any reduction in structural integrity should be minimal, Shino said as he accepted them with a slight bow. "Your girlfriend's father does good work," she observed in an approving tone. Shino merely raised an eyebrow in response. "What did she think of your little idea?" Misato asked curiously. "I was informed that if I ever used it during one of our spars, she would render me incapable of future reproduction," Shino replied. "Wow," Misato gushed, "I can practically hear the wedding vows now." Shino sighed as he took his weapons and left for training. "Must you?" Shibi asked his wife. "I must," Misato replied. "He's never going to get a girlfriend at this rate." Shibi sighed. Naruto continued getting to know more of the Turtle Clan. Many of them were like larger versions of Genji. Mostly slow and thoughtful, but kind and equally slow to take offense. But there were some exceptions. Some of the more advanced ones seemed to be as comfortable standing upright as the others were on all fours. The first of these he met was named Kabuto, no relation to the weird Konoha genin from the Chunin exam. He appeared to be named for the elaborate helmet he wore on his head. It matched the lacquered samurai armor that protected his unusually long limbs. He was close to Naruto's height, but carried a naginata, or sword spear, with a shaft longer than Jiraiya was tall. "I am honored to meet the new summoner," he said. "I am Kabuto," he proclaimed as he bowed. "I am Uzumaki Naruto, genin of Konoha," Naruto replied, bowing back as he'd been coached by Genji. Kabuto eyed Naruto as he straightened back up. "Do you study a weapon, Uzumaki?" he barked. Naruto shook his head. "I was told I should wait until I was near my full growth to select a proper weapon. Until then, I study taijutsu so my hands are free to form seals, and I know how to use kunai and shuriken." "So taijutsu is your current focus," the turtle observed in a thoughtful tone. "That is acceptable. I understand that you trained taijutsu under the other summoner?" Naruto nodded. "Good," Kabuto said with a chuckle as he dropped into a ready stance. "We shall spar now." What followed next was, for Kabuto, evidently a light workout. For Naruto, it was an advanced seminar in dodging and not getting skewered by that really sharp-looking naginata. After 30 minutes he felt like he'd spent the afternoon sparring with Lee. Fortunately, Kabuto was adept at twisting the haft at the last instant so Naruto would get slapped by the flat of the blade, rather than cut by the edge. Just as Naruto was about to drop, Kabuto stopped and fell back into a guard stance. "That was acceptable," Kabuto declared after a moment. "We should continue this every day until..." Until what?" Naruto replied, afraid to ask. "Until you can take the naginata away from me without getting hit once," Kabuto clarified. Naruto winced, but slowly nodded his agreement. "Ooh." Hinata inhaled sharply as she left the apothecary. Her studies had branched out into pharmaceuticals, including how to prepare refined medicines from the basic herbs. But she was not prepared to run into a group of branch family Hyuga picking up supplies. A few widened their eyes when they saw her, but then they immediately looked away. Even worse were the ones that looked through her like she didn't exist. She knew from Neji's notes that her father had made a declaration. During the period of her service to Senju Tsunade-sama, Hinata was to be treated as a senju. Ideally, no shame would fall upon the Hyuga for having a member of the main family as a servant to another clan. It was one thing to read about this in Neji's letter, or even understand why in her head. But in her heart, she felt like she'd just been stabbed. It was only long experience in hiding her true feelings that kept Hinata from breaking down. She would not shame herself with a public display of weakness, not now. She felt even worse when she realized that there was another Hyuga in the group, trailing behind the others. Neji. She felt her cheeks begin to burn with shame. He could read her far better than any branch family member, perhaps better than any other Hyuga. He would know her shame and despair like she'd shouted it from the rooftops. Unlike the others, Neji gave the smallest fraction of a nod as his eyes locked gazes with hers. She doubted anyone else could see it, but the barest hint of a smile curled the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smirk of derision, either, just simple pleasure in meeting his cousin. The pain faded like a mirage, and Hinata returned his smile with one of her own. Just as small and discreet, but no less heartfelt. She passed her cousin, finding her steps lighter than they were before. As Genji slowly introduced Naruto to the more senior turtles, the chakra requirements for some of them began to mount. He also began to notice that the jutsu he practiced for Jiraiya were becoming steadily more energy intensive. After their second month on the road, Jiraiya produced a piece of chakra-treated paper and asked Naruto to focus his chakra into it, making sure to exclude any of the Kyuubi's chakra. After taking a moment to make sure his hands and arms were clear, he did so and discovered that his primary element was actually air. "Huh," Naruto said. "I would have thought it was water or earth." "What makes you say that?" Jiraiya asked. "Well, I can do condensation and swamp of the underworld pretty well." "That's because you practiced them," Jiraiya shot back. "I lost track of how many times. And you have stupidly huge chakra reserves. Air being your primary element means that you will find it easier to learn air techniques, and they will work better for you. It's actually pretty rare in Konoha." "So, do you know any air techniques?" Jiraiya gave a long-suffering sigh. "Of course I do. One of the easiest is called Great Breakthrough. Now watch these seals and repeat them without molding chakra." Aburame Suba asked his nephew to stay a moment after the meeting of the clan elders concluded. That this was done through delivered pheromones and not speech was itself interesting. Shibi lingered over his papers, shuffling their order as the other members filed out. As the most junior member of the council, he was often stuck with the majority of the filing and record-keeping, so this was far from unusual. His fellow council members were not likely to linger in the council chambers after a 3-hour meeting regarding budgetary allocations. It seems that some things are, in fact, truly universal. When they were alone, Shibi stilled his papers as Suba resealed the room. "I received your message last night," Suba said without preamble. "The room is secure." Shino received a message a week ago from a discreet courier service, based in Grass. Shibi began without preamble. Using circuitous language, it directed in by a genjutsu keyed to Shino's chakra signature. Inside the cache was a sealed scroll that required his blood to open. "Those are rather elaborate precautions," Suba observed. "Do we know the origination of this communication?" "Yes," Shibi replied. "His Jonin sensei, the deceased one, Suba clarified. Ah, yes, Elder, Shibi confirmed. The courier had orders to send out the message if they did not hear from her by a certain interval. You are well informed. It was explained in the scroll, Shibi explained. She wished to avoid giving any false hope that she was still alive. That is, unusually well thought out. I am starting to understand some of Shino's rapid development. I understand he may be prepared for a third hive in the future? Yes, Elder, Shibi agreed, but her precautions made more sense once one considered the contents of the scroll. In it, she details what she has uncovered and what she has surmised regarding an active conspiracy working in part through the village council. Aburame Suba did not show surprise, but he stared at his nephew for a curiously long period of time. Does this have anything to do with the actions described by Bataru? In part, Shibi confirmed, but there are also hints of further attempts to subvert the Hokage's authority, as well as the elimination of certain undesired parties. Suba went still again. Tell me everything, he commanded. The toad hermit slowly revised his opinion of the turtles, or at least some of them. Kabuto proved to be damn useful. Jiraiya talked Naruto into training with the little armor-plated menace first thing each morning as a warm-up. That gave him a few more precious minutes of sleep, and usually slowed Naruto down enough that keeping up with his godson wasn't killing him. Jiraiya knew going into this that keeping Naruto fully occupied would be a challenge. That was actually good, in a way. They could squeeze the maximum amount of intensive training into the 6 months they had, working one-on-one. What he didn't realize was just how intensive. He'd gotten a taste in Konoha, preparing him for the Chunin exam, but he'd clearly underestimated how hard Guy was working the brat. Maybe Kurenai's death was making it worse. Someone his level trying to catch up to Itachi was crazy. Damned if he wasn't trying though. Jiraiya knew he was clearly getting too old for this crap. It wasn't just the physical side either, though they were doing an hour every day on advanced taijutsu forms and some sparring. He was constantly having to revise his estimates of Naruto's progress and devise new training techniques. His apprentice was already clever enough to see the advantages of shadow clones for certain types of training, and he wasn't afraid to use them. And by use, Jiraiya meant, use them in ridiculous numbers. He was picking up the air techniques Jiraiya knew at a frightening rate. It didn't let up, even when they were traveling. Unless they were trying for best possible speed, Naruto needed his mind occupied. And going all out was not a good way to stay under anyone's radar. The boy was used to Uchiha Kurenai giving them problems to mull over while they walked, so if Jiraiya said nothing, the questions started. Questions about everything. Jiraiya knew that he should not wish for a less motivated student, but damned if it wasn't exhausting. And discussion of some topics was not something he wanted to do while strolling on a road to nowhere in particular. So he tried to give Naruto problems and lessons associated with what they were actually doing, namely tradecraft and how to run a spy ring. It was a little gratifying to see someone soak in all the little things he'd picked up on over the years. And asking Naruto to flesh out imaginary life histories for him to use wherever they were heading gave Jiraiya a little peace and quiet. Hinata resisted the urge to worry at her lip as she concentrated on the chakra flowing through her hands. She did not flinch as the fish under her hands gave a feeble twitch. Any mistakes now and this fish would be just as dead as the last one. She felt bad for the fish, but Tsunade-sama insisted that this was the best way to learn the mystical palm healing technique. Also, part of her duties included preparing dinner for Tsunade-sama and Shizune-senpai, and she was running out of new fish recipes. It was really just a matter of chakra control, something she normally excelled at. But chakra control good enough for academy jutsu, or even Jaiuken strikes, was one thing. Medical techniques required a whole new order of precision to avoid disaster. Minute fluctuations in the flow of chakra could disrupt the healing process, or even inflict more damage. The first few fishes Hinata worked on were not even edible by the time she was done. Still, she seemed to finally be getting the hang of this. She could feel the fish slowly reviving under her hands. She bore down, forcing the chakra to flow as she willed, not allowing an instant of deviation. So focused was she that the timer ringing almost did not register. She looked up to see a smiling Shizune-senpai holding a bucket of clear water. All of this training was slowly increasing his chakra reserves, but this latest summon left Naruto feeling a little lightheaded. He wasn't sure if he had ever expended that much chakra on a single technique before. He wondered if this was how other ninja felt when they got chakra exhaustion. It kind of sucked, to be honest. Fortunately, his head quickly began to clear. He waved his hands, trying to disperse the some fog that surrounded him. As much chakra as that took, he expected to see a turtle the size of his apartment building. Genji and the others were a little vague on the details regarding the old one. But nothing loomed out of the rapidly clearing wisps of vapor. There was a muffled cough and Naruto looked down. The latest summon was an upright, if slightly stooped, figure only a little taller than Genji. His coloration was various hues of faded green, but what really grabbed Naruto's attention were the huge spectacles perched on the bridge of the turtle's beak. He could not figure out what was holding them in place, and they made the already protuberant eyes look huge. Adding a little height was an old-fashioned sleeping cap made of striped fabric. The pointed top had a rounded piece of fluff that dangled down the side of the turtle's head. The turtle opened its mouth twice, making a smacking sound, and then let out a yawn as it stretched. The motion made the tassel brush against the side of its head, and one hand quickly swept the sleeping cap off its head. The other hand reached down and tugged on a section of the shell plates covering the torso. Naruto blinked as the shell pulled away to reveal a disturbingly deep drawer. The cap was stuffed within and it was closed before Naruto could confirm what he thought he just saw. Sorry, the old turtle rasped. Fell asleep doing a bit of bedtime reading. Young Genji said you might be contacting me soon. Bit of a night owl. Eh? Almost as bad as old Pog. Back in the day. Oh well. Yes, old one, my apologies, I am Uzumaki Naruto, genin of Konoha. Naruto introduced himself, bowing. Old one? The weathered turtle asked, is that what they are calling me now? Naruto nodded. The old turtle snorted. I am Clothahump, and that is all the name I will ever need. I am, however, too old to stand on formalities. Let us sit and speak of things. You wouldn't happen to have any tea, would you? Naruto shook his head and created shadow clones to fetch fresh water in the teapot. Ah, useful spell, that, Clothahump said approvingly. I don't mean to be a bother, but we have much to discuss and I find that my throat tends to go dry if I speak too long. A blessing, by Mudge's reckoning. Soon the ancient turtle was warming his feet by the campfire and complimenting whoever purchased their supply of green tea. Clothahump reminded Naruto a little of the old people he sometimes saw around the former Hokage. A little stooped and fuss, he was a lot nicer to Naruto, and appreciated everything that was done to make him more comfortable. It was a little disconcerting, how kind he was for such a senior summons. Maybe it was just a reflection of the nature of the turtles. Most of them seemed to treat Naruto like a long-lost cousin. Even Kabuto when he wasn't sparring. Maybe Naruto was just too used to Guy. I can tell, the old turtle began, that Summi severely taxed your energy. It may be a while before you can summon the four, or the friend to all children and his offspring. But there are also certain spells, techniques you can learn because of your link to us. In time I may even be able to initiate you into the greater mysteries, but that is many steps down the road. I am still working on improving my chakra control and my reserves, Naruto admitted. I can tell, Clothahump replied. You have a lot of power for one so young. I don't doubt you could summon one or two of the four already. Except they refuse to be separated. You have to have enough energy to summon all four, split into 4 equal streams. Is that why they call them the four? Naruto asked. Yes. Well, and they have occidental names that are ridiculous and difficult to pronounce, Clothahump admitted. He frowned. I wonder if that's why they call me, never mind. Yes, continue working on your energy. I think the current chief summoner chose wisely when he selected you as his successor, but it will still require much effort to realize your full potential. In the meantime, I will teach you the beginnings of turtle magic. 4 months away from Konoha saw Jiraiya leading them into a remote corner of Wind Country. The Toad Hermit hadn't briefed Naruto on who they would be meeting way out here, but the genin held his tongue. He knew his godfather well enough now to realize that Jiraiya would tell him when he was ready, and acting disinterested would probably get him to reveal his plans the soonest. Finally, the old man called a halt when they were in the middle of a wide but shallow depression. Naruto looked around, eyeing ripples in the stony ground that seemed to have been carved from resentful earth by the wind itself. So, where are we? Naruto finally asked. The middle of nowhere, Jiraiya answered. Naruto sighed. Okay, why are we out here? Jiraiya smirked. Better question. We are miles and miles from any outpost, any sign of civilization. If I am right, we are the only ninja for 100 miles in any direction. Naruto swallowed. No, this didn't sound ominous. Not at all. What do we need that much privacy for? We need to see if you can put the 9 tails to work, Jiraiya answered in a serious tone. Sensei, I really don't think that's a good idea, Naruto protested. It probably isn't, Jiraiya agreed, but I need to teach you how to best use every advantage you've got, and a bottomless well of chakra you can draw on is definitely an advantage. Naruto shook his head. Kyuubi's chakra messes me up more often than it helps. I think it does that on purpose. Besides, I want to succeed using my own skills, not borrowed power. I don't want to owe anything to the demon fox that tried to destroy Konoha. Look, Jiraiya argued, I understand your feelings on this. Under normal circumstances I'd honor you for them. But this is far from normal. A bunch of serious S-class Nukenin are after you, probably because of your prisoner. You need to use every advantage, every skill you can master, if you want to get through this. It's not safe though, Naruto protested. Every time I've drawn on its chakra, I think it's influenced me. It's made me really angry before. I almost forget myself. Jiraiya frowned and scratched at his jaw. Maybe you need to explain a few facts to your prisoner. How'd I do that? It only spoke to me before when I was unconscious. Meditation should work, Jiraiya replied in a speculative tone. Naruto let out a groan. Fortunately, it did not take as long as Naruto expected before he found himself in the damp basement mindscape again. Naruto sometimes wondered how aware the fox was of what was going on, and this just fueled his suspicions. He stood and locked gazes with the massive face behind the seal. Again, Naruto was struck by how real it all seemed. He could hear condensation slowly dripping from a vent. It mostly smelled like damp socks, but there was an underlying musk Naruto remembered from before. "What brings you here, jailer?" the Kyuubi snarled. "We need to talk," Naruto said. "So talk, monkey," the fox declared dismissively. "It's not like I have any interest in your petty lies." Naruto clenched his jaw, refusing to be baited. "I know you're at least partially aware of what's going on, so why would I lie? And I think you have an interest in our mutual survival? Maybe you're not quite as stupid as you look, but just because I removed that one seal, don't imagine I care what happens to you. And I'm sure a bunch of S-class missing men want to capture me just so they can set you free. No ulterior motives there, I'm sure," Naruto shot back in a sarcastic drawl. He was starting to understand why Shikamaru did that. Fun and effective at getting your point across. The Kyuubi seemed less impressed. "That still sounds more like your problem than mine," it growled. "You humans have sought to use my kind as weapons for centuries. Why should I care about trading one master for another? The fourth didn't seal you to make a weapon." Naruto shot back. "You were attacking our home. What was he supposed to do? Stand back and watch you do it?" "My grievance with Konoha is older than that pathetic cluster of hovels you call home," the Kyuubi roared, muzzle slamming against the seal. "I have been used and sealed away in turn by your Hokages, and I would enjoy nothing more than to piss on the ashes of your cursed village." The wind from the Nine Tails rant pushed Naruto back several feet, his sandals grinding across the damp concrete. "Okay, fine," he shouted back. "I wasn't there, so I can't dispute your grievance. But I didn't do anything to you. Hinata and Shino didn't do anything to you. We were babies the last time you were out. Even if you do have a right to be angry, taking it out on people who didn't hurt you is just wrong. And it's stupid, and you are not stupid." The Kyuubi's eyes narrowed, but when it spoke, it was without the gale force winds. "I still don't see any benefit in helping you, monkey." Naruto decided to go for a different approach, "And here I thought you didn't want me embarrassing you. What are you jabbering about now? Before," Naruto replied, "with the seal, you said you didn't want anyone else marking up your den. Lots of people know you are sealed inside me now. If I get taken out because you won't lend me any extra chakra, do you know what they will think? Guess the Kyuubi wasn't as powerful as he thought. Maybe he isn't really the strongest of the Biju. Shukaku got huge when he manifested through Gaara, now that was a real threat." "Are you actually trying to manipulate me?" the nine-tailed fox asked incredulously. "Not very well," Naruto admitted. "But no matter what happened in the past, we are stuck with each other, aren't we?" "Not if you open that seal," the fox reminded him. "Which would probably kill me, and would definitely endanger my friends. I'll pass on that," Naruto replied. "It's not like I'm asking for so much, am I?" There was a pause as the fox seemed to mull over Naruto's words. "You will only use my power to destroy your worst enemies?" the Kyuubi clarified. "I'll use my own skills whenever possible," Naruto vowed. "I don't want to be too dependent on your power, and you deserve better than to become a glorified crutch." The last bit was added on a whim, but if he was getting any sort of concession, a little flattery wouldn't hurt. "Very well," the Kyuubi growled. "I will allow it in emergencies and against truly strong opponents." "Well," Naruto added, "it would probably be a good idea to practice it. We're out in the middle of nowhere and I have no idea what I can do with your chakra. I'd rather do my trial and error now, and not in the middle of a fight. I have no wish to make either of us look foolish." The fox's glare was back. "You're a pushy little monkey, aren't you? Then I want something in return." "What can I give you in here?" Naruto asked curiously. "Well, you can clean it the hell up," the Kyuubi snarled. "Wait, what?" Naruto asked confused. "I don't know anything about fuinjutsu." The Kyuubi no Kitsune, whose tails could wreak havoc and create cataclysms with but a wave, actually sighed in disgust. "Stupid monkey. The seal is the only real thing in here. The rest of this place is a projection of your so-called mind, and I am sick of sitting in this damp, stinking mindscape of yours." Naruto winced. That had never occurred to him. He didn't need a mirror to know his face and exposed neck were reddening. I'll talk to Jiraiya and get right on that, as soon as I know how." "Go," the Kyuubi spat. Naruto got. Author's note. Yes, I am back. And yes, I intend to update much more often now. How long I'll continue to do so depends on some real-life things, like finances, my original fiction, and other stuff. I'm back to work on Nightmares of Futures Past now. Thanks as always to Run Samuk, Tempest Kitsune, and Torben for awesome beta work. You three rock. This chapter would be much poorer without you. Chapter 24. Hinata looked up from the scroll she was reading. The muscles along her spine protested as she straightened up. She'd lost track of time again and she was only halfway through Tsunade-sama's notes on chakra-stimulated nerve regeneration. Her new teacher was rewriting the book on what could and could not be done. With what she was reading now, many injuries thought to be career-ending could become mere inconveniences. She slowly stretched as she made a note of her place in the huge scroll. The door opened and Shizune-senpai stuck her head in. "Still at it?" she asked. "You need to take a break, Hinata," she chided in a kindly tone. "My apologies," Hinata said quickly. "I lost track of time. This work with regenerating nerve cells, it's amazing." Shizune smiled. "Yes, a little too amazing, sometimes." "I'm sorry," Hinata said quickly, "I don't understand." Shizune motioned for Hinata to follow her, and spoke as they left the classroom. These more advanced techniques are highly effective, but they require extremely good chakra control, not to mention large reserves to sustain them. Tsunade's best work gave birth to techniques that only she and a handful of other people will ever be able to use. That's great for special cases, but for the overall population the impact will be minimal. "I've heard her talk about the lack of qualified medic nins," Hinata replied. "That's part of it," Shizune agreed. "There is also an element of, well, you know the saying about how it's easier to destroy than to create." Hinata nodded. "Well, it's also a lot easier to destroy than to repair," Shizune declared with a grimace. Most shinobi can spend much less time training with their elemental affinity and see a lot more progress. If Tsunade had taken her natural chakra reserves in control, and spent all that time working on lightning jutsu, she could easily have humbled the best lightning users in Kumo. That's one reason there aren't more combat medic nins. Most active duty shinobi concentrate on things that increase their combat effectiveness. Hinata frowned. But if treatment is delayed until after the patient is evacuated, the prognosis is usually so much worse. "That's true," Shizune agreed, "which is why we're starting this program." Tsunade thinks the improved treatment outcomes are worth the extra training required. But some would argue that having more combat-oriented ninja is the better strategy. Hinata thought about this for a moment as they made their way down the hall. "Who do you think is right?" she asked after a moment. One thing she admired about Shizune-senpai was that while she was utterly loyal to Tsunade, she wasn't afraid to disagree with her mentor. Shizune smiled. "I think that combat medics may not be needed as much in peacetime, or when there is only light skirmishing. Injuries may occur, but they are not as common, and highly skilled shinobi focused on offensive techniques can eliminate their enemies quickly enough to avoid injury. However, in wartime or extended operations in hostile terrain, mistakes are more common, and injuries will occur with greater frequency. Highly skilled shinobi can suffer mortal or career-ending injuries, but the availability of highly skilled, immediate medical care can often reverse that. I think, in the long run, Tsunade's plan will save far more resources than it costs Konoha." Hinata nodded as she digested this train of thought, but Shizune wasn't done. "So," she continued, "from a resource use perspective, it's more effective when the need is most dire. But that doesn't even address what Konoha stands for. You've heard the third Hokage talk about the will of fire before, right?" Hinata nodded. The old Hokage made a point of addressing each academy class in their first year. That idea was really introduced to Konoha through the Senju clan, Tsunade-sama's ancestors. They saw the village as being like one big family, and everyone should love the village they fight to protect. But that idea goes both ways. If we are like one family, then that means that we should value the lives of individual shinobi, no matter their skill. If that means reducing our overall firepower to prevent unnecessary deaths, then that is a price we should be willing to pay." Hinata thought about her own family for a moment. For once, it didn't bring a sudden stab of shame. "I'm not sure everyone sees it that way," she said quietly. Shizune laughed. "They're wrong, or at least the Hokage thinks they are wrong, and her opinion carries a lot more weight now. Of course, it helps that Sarutobi-sama is helping her manage the council." Hinata nodded. She hadn't seen much of the former Hokage recently, but when he came in for his medical follow-ups he seemed much more relaxed than Hinata remembered. Despite losing an arm, the shadows under his eyes were lighter and he moved like a weight had been removed from his shoulders. Hinata was glad that his retirement seemed to be good for him, but she wondered just how heavy a burden it was to be Hokage. Tsunade herself seemed perpetually grumpy, and Hinata hoped that Naruto didn't ever come to regret his life's ambition. The two kunoichi were quiet as they made their way out of the building. Shizune squinted at the bright afternoon light and fished a scrap of paper out of her sleeve. "Well, here's what we will need from the apothecary for next week. Can you pick it up while you are running errands?" Hinata nodded. "Of course, Shizune-senpai. This would also give her a chance to visit Kurenai-sensei's house and water Naruto's plants." Shizune smiled. "Oh, and a question came up. There is another Chunin exam scheduled in a little over a month, not too long after Naruto is due to return. We are thinking about sending your team, but Tsunade reviewed everyone's file and there is a potential complication. This exam is to be held in Kumogakure." Hinata froze in place for a moment. "I think that my father would raise some objections to that, even if I had my eyes sealed against theft." Shizune coughed. "Sealed? No, wait Hinata, let me start over. Normally, we wouldn't send a team, let alone several, to a Kumo exam. They're pretty suspicious of other villages, even in peacetime, and you saw all too well how an exam can serve as cover for an invasion. We haven't been invited in the past." Hinata nodded. Konoha was only just now repairing the last visible reminders of the sound and sand invasion. "Well, this year it's different. The Raikage himself has extended invitations to Konoha and Suna to send teams to their exam." Shizune lowered her voice a little, eyeing the foot traffic passing them onto the street. "We think it's because the invasion went so poorly." "Poorly?" Shizune nodded. With the forces at hand, and struck with surprise, Konoha still fared pretty well. Sarutobi-sama being forced to retire was the worst thing to happen, but with Tsunade's assumption of the office, Konoha still has a strong Hokage. "We think the Raikage is curious, especially since rumors state that some of the exam contestants played a key role, yet none of them were promoted." Hinata suppressed a sigh. She knew she wasn't included in that number, but from things she had overheard, she knew the village council cancelled the examination while the third was incapacitated. Otherwise, she was sure her teammates would have been promoted. While it did mean she would have another chance to test with them, she didn't wish to benefit from their misfortune. What made it worse was that she was fairly certain her father had a hand in that injustice. She had the impression that very little happened on the council without his input. "So you think he wants to get a look at our shinobi to see if the rumors are true?" Shizune nodded. "Yes, enough so that the Raikage is willing to personally guarantee the safety of our candidates traveling to and from the exam." Shizune put her hand on Hinata's shoulder. "He has specifically repudiated the clan he said was behind the attempt to kidnap you years ago." Hinata resisted the urge to wring her hands. That was quitted to admit. If anything was attempted, the Raikage would suffer a huge loss of face. Wars were started over less. "What does Hokage-sama think?" she asked quietly. "She thinks that, with those guarantees, this is an opportunity for Konoha to make an impression on potential allies, enemies, and clients." Hinata nodded. She remembered the third Hokage explaining the true purpose behind the Chunin examinations before the preliminary round. "So she is accepting the Raikage's invitation?" she asked. Shizune nodded. "She is, but remember that participation in the exams is strictly voluntary. You do not have to go if you don't want to," she explained. "In fact, given your history, I would not blame you at all if you decided to wait for the next one." Hinata shook her head. "If Shino and Naruto-kun are ready for the exam, I will go with them," she said quickly. Ushino found himself gaining new respect for his missing teammates' mental fortitude. This happened, not coincidentally, every time he was attached to Team Guy for a mission. While he had entered a cautious détente with Hyuga Neji, and Tenten was a pleasure to train with, the third member of Team Guy, along with their sensei, was another matter entirely. While he could not deny Maeda Guy's proficiency in taijutsu and overall skill as a shinobi, the sheer amount of noise the man generated was ridiculous. When you added Rock Lee to the mix, it was even worse. This, of course, made him question his own sanity when he found himself attending their so-called morning warm-up sessions. Maeda Guy had requested that Tenten join him and Lee in the mornings, as he wanted to increase her training tempo. Tenten, who was not pleased with her showing in the previous Chunin examination, reluctantly agreed. She mentioned this to Shino after one of their practice spars, and added that he had been invited as well. Apparently, her Jonin sensei was aware of their training together and approved. Unfortunately, morning was when his mother Misato was usually available for training. While he had learned much of her signature 2-, praying mantis style, she still had more advanced techniques to teach him. When he explained this to Tenten, she accepted his decline without rancor, which he appreciated. He apparently made an error of some sort when he mentioned this to his parents at dinner that evening. His father said nothing, but a minute wince was visible to Shino's trained eye. His mother, however, quickly informed him that she would soon not be available for morning training. This was likely to be for a while, so he might as well attend the morning sessions. When Shino questioned the reasons for this unavailability, his parents' reaction suggested that this was not a line of inquiry that should be pursued if he wished to avoid severe cognitive dissonance. Not even the most stoic Abarame's son wished to learn details regarding maternal fertility schedules. Hopefully, a younger sibling might provide a useful distraction at some point in the future. Tenten seemed unusually pleased when he informed her of his schedule change, and that he would be able to join her after all. The reason for this became all too clear during the first session he attended. She did not want to be the only sane person there. Maeda Guy and Rock Lee's proclivities were already known to Shino. What was less apparent was the degree to which Hinata had internalized those philosophies. When she mentioned sparring for a couple of hours, Shino thought that meant taking turns, with time to cool down between and analyze how each match had gone. Like sane people. He did not realize sparring for a couple of hours meant fighting continuously for 120 minutes, going all out the entire time. The only time he saw either her or Lee even pause was when they were knocked down or half-stunned from a glancing blow. As he squared off with Tenten, he realized that she desperately wanted someone else there with more than a minimal degree of sanity. By the end of Guy Sensei's ridiculously difficult cool-down exercises, Shino began to understand how Naruto's taijutsu had evolved so quickly. By the time Naruto was comfortable pulling up one tail's worth of chakra and manifesting a weak chakra cloak, Jiraiya was antsy to head back to Konoha. He'd been exchanging messages with Tsunade, so he was aware of the Raikage's offer. It made him a little uneasy when a potential enemy offered something he wanted to do anyway. Jiraiya could understand why the man might want to get a look at potential future competition. However, the leader of Kumohagakure might not anticipate how this could blow up in his face. Other people, including Kumo's favored clients, would be attending as well. Jiraiya had always been a little leery of his sensei's vision of the Chunin exams as a proxy for outright warfare. But if ever there was a chance to put this theory to the test, it was now. A strong show of force by Konoha's genin could make their enemies reconsider future plans. Jiraiya smiled when he remembered debriefing the Sand Genin Tamari after the invasion. She was convinced by that point that her father had been insane to even consider attacking Konoha. Fostering that belief in Kumo and their allies was, in his opinion, worth a little risk. Now he and his apprentice were practicing one of Jiraiya's specialties: how to travel quickly without anyone noticing. Any idiot can leap from tree to tree in order to cover ground quickly. That also means any idiot can detect them, or find the traces. There was a whole science dedicated to examining the scuff marks left on various kinds of bark by sandals. That sort of thing wasn't Jiraiya's specialty. He preferred infiltration and social engineering, but as a Konoha spymaster, he kept up on what his opposition might be up to. Joining a suitably equipped merchant caravan under a well-rehearsed identity allowed you to avoid all sorts of attention. Picking the right one, in other words fairly prosperous and transporting perishable goods, meant you would be moving quickly by civilian standards with no one questioning why. It also gave him an excuse to drill Naruto on altering his distinctive appearance without resorting to Henj no Jutsu. He'd been pleased to note during the search for Tsunade that Naruto's former sensei had at least trained her students in the basics. But this was one area where small mistakes could lead to grave consequences, so Jiraiya wasn't about to pass up the opportunity to drill Naruto on his disguise skills. When the time came to part ways from the caravan, Naruto also showed that Kurenai's efforts to get him to think had not been wasted. He suggested that he leave behind a couple of overcharged shadow clones, disguised as himself and Jiraiya in their traveling identities. That way, if someone was tracking their movements, especially after the fact, they would have no way of knowing exactly when they did leave. At the rate the caravan was heading for Wave Country, even half a day would really throw off a potential tracker. Jiraiya was a little dubious at first. He wasn't sure the clones would last long enough to be worth it. He tried not to notice how smug Naruto was, a full 24 hours later, when he informed him that the clones had finally slipped away into the woods near the caravan's campsite and dispelled themselves. Instead, Jiraiya just grunted and picked up the pace. Their 6 months was almost over, and back in Konoha there was a large bottle of sake with his name on it. Tsunade squeezed the bridge of her nose as Hyuga Hiyashi left her office. The leader of the Hyuga clan had not been pleased to learn of the invitation to Kumo's Chunin exam, but in the end the Raikage's guarantees had been enough to make him relent. In truth, he seemed unusually interested in that aspect, and her more suspicious side wondered if he was planning something underhanded. She sighed and opened her bottom desk drawer. Of course he was planning something underhanded, that was a given. But she didn't think he'd try anything aimed at making the race. There was too much at stake, and the consequences if someone leaked the plot too severe. At the least, the Raikage would demand his life, and Tsunade would gladly give it to her fellow Kage. She extracted the bottle of sake and took a sip, savoring the burn as she contemplated sending the arrogant clan leader to the gallows with a song in her heart. It wasn't terribly professional, but the Hyuga had made a habit of subtly reminding her of how unqualified she was to lead. She was just glad Hiruzen's retirement gave him the time to run interference for her with the council. Her lips twisted, even as she took another sip. It still felt strange, calling her old sensei by his given name, but he had insisted once she became Hokage. They were of equal rank now, and shared an understanding of how heavy that hat could really be. Retired or not, the professor continued to teach. She'd been more than happy to send her predecessor's advisors, Homura and Kaharu, off to their own retirements, with the gratitude of Konoha. Most of their status derived from long service and being Hiruzen's teammates back in the dawn of time. Danzo, however, was too well entrenched. He was allied with, or had dirt on, a goodly portion of the village council and was reputed to have contacts in the court of the fire daimyo. How much of that was rumor, she didn't know, but it was enough to make her handle him with care. Being a wandering alcoholic was so much easier than sorting out all this political crap. Still, there were compensations. She now had the power to push through a comprehensive medic nin training program. Hyuga Hinata had the potential to be, dare she say it, a medical prodigy. Imagining the look on Hiyashi's face as she announced that got her through several very dull meetings. The progress reports from Maida Gai and Aburame Shibi, along with Jiraiya's messenger toads, were equally encouraging. Accepting the Raikage's offer was a risk, but a calculated one. Tsunade took a third, smaller sip and sighed as she resealed the bottle and placed it back in the drawer. She paused and extracted a thick file folder. Yuichi Kuranai submitted such detailed reports that she wondered if the woman wasn't exhibiting some kind of compulsive behavior. She opened the folder to the piece of paper she'd left sticking out to mark her place and sighed. If the Jonin were still alive today, Tsunade would be torn between leaving her with her team and reassigning her to take command of the academy. She was betting a lot on the former teammate, but she liked the odds. There was a knock at the door and Tsunade looked up. The list of people allowed to do that by the Chunin guards was very small. "Come in," she said. Sarutobi Hiruzen walked in, trailed by his ever-present shadow. For a man who'd lost an arm and nearly died a few months ago, he was looking surprisingly healthy. He attributed it to enjoying his retirement, but Tsunade wasn't taking any chances. That was why she'd agreed to Haku's request to be assigned as the Sandame's assistant. Part of his unspoken orders was to monitor the old man's health and make sure he was taking care of himself. Sentimentality aside, the village still needed his wisdom and political aim. More, Tsunade needed him. She shuddered to think how many headaches the council would be without him acting as a buffer and advisor. The old man had a faint smile on his face as he sat down in the chair beside her desk. Haku, as always, stood behind his right shoulder, watching his back and protecting his weak side. Tsunade wondered if the ridiculously pretty young man realized he was doing it automatically. Hiruzen fumbled in his robes for a moment before frowning. The only argument she'd won with him was to get him to stop smoking. The risks after recovering from pneumonia, coupled with his age, were too great. It probably helped that his estranged son, Asuma, had also given up smoking cigarettes for some reason, and that gave the two something in common to complain about. Now that the father was no longer Hokage, the two would sometimes be seen together playing shogi. As someone that had lost her own family, Tsunade had bitter feelings toward anyone who squandered opportunities she no longer had. She pursed her lips. "You're looking well," she observed. "I'm feeling well, all things considered," the old man said. "I haven't seriously coughed, aside from when I first wake up, in over 2 weeks." Tsunade nodded. "We can schedule another scan next week then. I'd like to make sure all the pulmonary scarring is gone. But you didn't come here, voluntarily, to discuss your health." The professor smiled. "No, I was wondering what you thought about the Raikage's proposal." Tsunade sighed. "I don't suppose I should even ask how you already know about that." "People talk, even in a hidden village," he replied. "Hiyashi did not look happy as he was leaving the tower, so I assume you were going ahead with this?" "Hiyashi is never happy," Tsunade observed sourly. "But the Raikage's guarantees seem solid. He really wants to get a look at my cards." Hiruzen nodded. "And not just him," he added. "If Suna sends Baki's team, his brother will get a chance to meet or at least observe 2 people of personal interest." Tsunade nodded. He hadn't spelled it out in front of Haku, no matter how trustworthy the boy was. But she knew the Raikage's adopted brother was the Jinchuriki of the 8 tails and mentor to the Jinchuriki of the 2 tails. Rumor had it that Killer Bee both exerted an unusual degree of control over his Biju and was extremely loyal to his brother, the Raikage. "I hadn't considered that," she admitted. "Do you think it will be a problem?" "I think," Hiruzen answered, "that there will still be more to gain than to lose. I don't think we have any reason to be concerned about loyalties." "And Suna?" Tsunade pressed. "If Konoha sent even 1 team, Suna likely would as well." "That's an interesting situation," her predecessor observed with a small smile. "You may want to give Naruto some official recognition for asking Jiraiya to take a look at young Gaara's seal. The difference after he repaired it is quite remarkable. I have even heard that young Gaara has decided to adopt Naruto's grand ambition for his own." "He wants to become the Case Cage?" Tsunade asked, a little incredulous. "As his father was before him," Hiruzen reminded her. "His siblings are also making it publicly known that he was previously suffering from a damaged seal. There haven't been any incidents since he returned, so people are slowly coming to accept this." Tsunade leaned back in her chair. "You're awfully well informed," she observed. Hiruzen smiled. "People know I'm your advisor," he said, "and they are used to me having the highest clearance. Please don't take it as a slight directed toward you." "I'm not," she assured him. "I just wonder how many others enjoy such access." "Homura and Kaharu are officially, and unofficially, retired now," Hiruzen said with a sigh. "They knew this was likely, since they never really got on well with you or Jiraiya. But they still supported either of you as the strongest candidates to lead Konoha." "I know, and I never doubted their patriotism," Tsunade assured him. "But you haven't included Shimura Danzo in that category." Hiruzen shook his head. "He has always done what he thought best, damn the consequences." He paused. "That's one reason I came to see you. I think participating in this Chunin examination is a good idea, but I don't think you should leave the village unattended right now." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Wouldn't that be a huge sign of disrespect if the village cage doesn't attend?" "Not as long as a Hokage attends," he replied. "I could say I asked a personal favor since I know most of the genin involved, and missed the chance to see them advance." Tsunade mulled this over. This has some possibilities, she conceded. I was worried what they might get up to while I was away. Aside from that, you definitely don't want to let the paperwork build up, Hiruzen reminded her, earning H. Naruto could barely restrain himself as he fidgeted next to Jiraiya. They stood in a slow-moving line queued up to a large gate. Part of him wanted to leap on top of that gate and shout that he was back. Two things stopped him from doing this. 1. People would think he was an idiot, and might attack him since he was dressed as a nondescript traveler. No sense giving the Chunin gate guards something to be nervous about. The second was that Jiraiya offered to handle the initial report and debriefing solo, if, and only if, Naruto could avoid breaking cover the rest of the way home. Just his luck the old degenerate would count such an action as a failure. Naruto wasn't dumb. He knew Jiraiya wanted to discuss some things privately with the Hokage. But he had things he'd rather do than cool his heels in the hallway while they did that. Hot showers, Ichiraku ramen, and finding his friends were all on his list, in no particular order. Besides, the stuff concealing his whisker-shaped birthmarks was staring to itch. So he fidgeted quietly, looking around like any young man visiting a hidden village for the first time might do. Finally, their turn came and Jiraiya shuffled closer to one of the Chunin manning the checkpoint and briefly showed him something Naruto couldn't see. Whatever was concealed by Jiraiya's bulk got the guard's attention in a hurry. He wasn't screaming, so Naruto assumed he hadn't been flashed. What the guard did do was escort them through the gate with no more questions. As they passed through, Naruto looked around again, relaxing a little. It was gratifying that he couldn't see a single trace of the botched invasion anymore. Most of the major damage was repaired before he left, but now he couldn't see anything to indicate the battle had even occurred. Even the repaired sections of wall had been weathered to match the rest. He smiled and cleared his throat. "Yeah, kid, I heard you," Jiraiya drawled lazily. "You managed not to foul it up too badly, so I guess you can go." Naruto made a hurt face. "So mean?" he huffed. "I guess Clothahump-sama was right about you after all." "What did that ambulatory soup bowl say?" Jiraiya's howl of outrage was cut off when he realized he was addressing the rapidly receding backside of his apprentice. Instead, he chuckled and shook his head as he turned and strolled toward the Hokage's tower. Naruto scratched at his cheek as he weighed his options. He really needed to stow his traveling pack in disguise, and his face itch was getting worse, so he decided to go home first. Then he could hit Ichiraku's and keep an eye out for his team. If that didn't work, he was sure he could ask at the Abarames. He smiled when he remembered the first clan to openly support him. It made him wonder if his parents would have been anything like Shibi and Misato. His mother teased Shinobi a lot, but it was always playful, and anyone could see that she adored both him and her husband. Naruto couldn't help but envy the taller boy, just a little bit. Fortunately, he could also sense that Shino was aware of just how lucky he was. His mood was already a little melancholy by the time he reached the residential district, and the sight of the Uchiha homestead added a pang of sorrow. He was quiet as he fished out his keys and let himself into the silent abode. The house was still, but not as dusty as he feared. He hoped Hinata was able to stay here if Tsunade gave her a break. Of course, that didn't sound too likely from Jiraiya's words. He was relieved to see Mr. Uko and the other houseplants were doing well, thriving even. Naruto smiled as he unpacked and stowed his equipment. He knew that if he asked Hinata to look after his plants, they'd be fine. If it also got her used to coming around when she otherwise felt she would be intruding, all the better. Kurenai-sensei meant for this to be a haven for her as well. He thought again about his sensei's last letter as he ran a shower as hot as he could stand. Sensei's words regarding Hinata's feelings haunted him. She loved him? Really? Every time he contemplated that, his stomach dropped towards his feet. It was such a big thing. He had no idea how to even think about it. Did he love her back? He didn't know, couldn't know. He'd never had anyone love him before, at least not that he was aware of. He knew Kurenai-sensei cared about him. She cared about all of her genin. Could you love more than one person? Or was it just really strong like? He loved Ichiraku's ramen, but he wouldn't trade someone's life for it. Well, maybe Orochimaru's. Why the hell didn't they teach people about this in the academy? Why hadn't Kurenai? But even as he rinsed the shampoo away, ignoring the tears of frustration, he realized he already knew the answer. Normal kids, ones with parents and families, didn't need to be taught this stuff. Their families taught them. He growled and smacked his head against the tiles in frustration. This all came back to the Kyuubi and the way he'd been isolated all his life. Well, he wasn't going to let that get him down. He just had to get the answers himself. After all, he'd kept Iruka's secret a secret, so his former instructor owed him one, or two. Cheering up at actually having a plan of action, Naruto finished rinsing off. He dried off and took great pleasure in dressing in a clean uniform. But as he exited the bedroom, he stopped. The front door was standing slightly open, and there was someone laying on the floor of the foyer. He edged cautiously forward and his heart gave a lurch when he realized it was Hinata. In a flash, he was kneeling beside the fallen kunoichi and scooping her up. There was no sign of blood or injury. He had her deposited on the couch before she began to stir. He gently shook her shoulder, but flinched back when her eyes snapped open. "En Naruto-kun," she gasped. Yeah. I'm back," he announced lamely. "Jiraiya is reporting to the Hokage, so I came here for a shower before I went looking for everyone. Looks like you found me first," he added. What happened though?" Hinata's face flushed red. "Oh, I was coming to water the plants when I thought I heard someone, so I activated." Her voice trailed off, and if anything her face went even darker. Oh, Naruto said, looking left and right, anywhere but at his mortified friend. "I noticed you did a really good job. Mr. Uko has never looked better," he babbled. "Want to get some ramen?" he added after a moment. "My treat? You can tell me what everyone has been up to." Hinata nodded quickly. But before they left, Naruto had a small task. Hinata watched as he quickly prepared a pot of green tea and brought it to the study. Hinata trailed behind him, mystified, carrying a tray and a single cup at his request. They placed their burdens on the small table next to an overstuffed chair and a set of overflowing bookshelves. Then Naruto knelt and with his palm on the floor, molded a shockingly immense amount of chakra. Some no jutsu. The elder, he called out as mist burst forth from under his hand. When the mist cleared, they were joined by a short, stooped figure. "Clothahump," Naruto asked. "I'd like you to meet Hyuga Hinata, my friend and teammate." "Ah," the old turtle rasped. "I have heard so much about you. It is a rare pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." Hinata bowed deeply, her face coloring again. "I am honored to meet you." "Such a polite young lady," Clothahump murmured approvingly. He looked around, roomy eyes peering through the enormous tortoiseshell spectacles. "So is this your home, Naruto?" "It is," Naruto confirmed. "We are back in Konoha now. This is the house that was left to me by Kurenai-sensei. When we discussed her love of books, you said you wished you could have read some of them, so I thought." Clothahump smiled, looking over at the bookshelves and the steaming pot of tea. "Bless you, my boy. This is a rare treat. I haven't had any new reading material since John Tom's last visit." Naruto squirmed, a little uncomfortable at the praise. Then he glanced at Hinata. "It made him feel smart. Like Kurenai-sensei used to do." He smiled back. Itachi was really happy to see Naruto had returned. So happy, in fact, that he left his broth unattended to come out from behind the counter and hug the embarrassed genin. "It's so good to see you back," the ramen chef beamed. "I have a bunch of new ideas I want you to try out." He coughed a little when Ayame elbowed him. "Once you've gotten settled in, of course," he added. Naruto laughed out loud. "You're right. I'm so happy to be back here. You could serve mop water and I'd think it was great." He paused. "You have no idea what passes for ramen in some of the places I've been," he added with a shudder. "I even had it at the one place where they served it ice cold. I thought I was in hell." "That's an abomination," Tucci agreed. "Jiraiya called it hiyashi chuka," Naruto added, "but I just called it nasty. They said it wasn't supposed to be warm. I mean, what is the point? I don't care if it's hot outside. Ramen is supposed to be hot." "Some people will never understand," Tucci added in a solemn tone. "Sounds like you need a Naruto protein special on the house," he added. "A Naruto protein special?" Naruto asked, his eyes going wide. Ayame smiled. Hinata had some suggestions a couple of months ago, so he incorporated them into a new dish. She winked. The name was her idea. Naruto turned toward his teammate. "Hinata?" The Hyuga was turning decidedly pink again, but her voice was steady. "Tsunade-sensei and Shizune-senpai had me reviewing the basics of nutritional theory," she explained. "I realized that while you do need carbohydrates, you are not getting enough protein and other nutrients with your preferred diet. This is especially true when you are training. I explained my findings to Ayame and we came up with some extra toppings to address this, while also reducing the overall sodium content. Once we worked this out, we brought it to Shizune-senpai and she approved it as being a healthy meal substitute for active-duty Konoha shinobi. That means we get to put a little stamp next to it on the menu," Ayame added. "And word got around. It costs a little more because of the ingredients, but our ninja customers are more than happy to pay a small premium. And civilians who want to eat healthier ramen have picked up on this as well. It's one of our best-selling items now." Naruto turned back to Hinata, eyes wide and mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "Naruto?" Hinata asked in a tremulous voice. "Is it all right that we named it after you?" All the confidence she'd exhibited when discussing the nutritional content of the new dish was gone. In fact, she looked almost on the verge of tears and Ayame was starting to scowl. "All right?" Naruto asked. "All right, Hinata, you got a new type of ramen named in my honor. You absolutely rock." Hinata let out a sigh of relief, but added a sudden squeak when Naruto hugged her hard enough to lift her off her feet. "Best homecoming ever," he whispered in the shivering girl's ear, still grinning like a loon. Naruto was just finishing his protein special when Hinata sat up with a smile. A moment later, a familiar voice rang out. "Naruto, you have returned. Have you been fanning the flames of your youth?" Naruto slurped down the last of the broth. "Hi, Guy-sensei," he called out after wiping his mouth. As he turned on the stool, Team Guy, along with Shino, stepped up to the counter. "We can take a break now," Maida Guy announced. "5 Naruto protein specials for my most excellent team and their equally excellent addition." He boomed as he stepped up to the counter. The rest of his team shuffled after him at different speeds. Rock Lee was only half a step behind his sensei, and brimming with energy as usual. Neji, Tenten, and Shino all looked rather worse for the wear. Tenten let out a low moan as she finally sat down, and began kneading her right thigh muscles with one hand, wincing. Neji had bruises visible on his unbandaged arm and Shino leaned forward resting his elbows on the bar, back sagging in obvious exhaustion. "Tough mission?" Naruto asked sympathetically. "Tora," the genin announced with a groan. Naruto's eyes bugged out. "The Fire Lady's cat?" he asked incredulously. "Sometimes it was a pain to retrieve the furball, but, seriously?" "Guy-sensei comes up with the best ways to make a mission challenging," Lee crowed proudly. The look Tenten gave her teammate should have shaved years off his life. Naruto ordered a miso ramen as he listened to their story. He shuddered several times at their collective tale of woe. Guy was silent, concentrating on his food as they talked. But when they finished, he spoke up. "Naruto," he asked, "have you been keeping up with your taijutsu training while you were on your trip?" Naruto nodded solemnly, glad that he'd anticipated this question. "I took Kabuto's Naginata away from him last week. He says that I will be ready to spar with the Fore soon." Guy's eyes widened for a moment, then he gave an enormous grin and a thumbs up. "You're truly exploding with youth. I look forward to you rejoining us in the mornings." Neji slumped as Hinata patted him sympathetically on the shoulder. Tenten groaned aloud and thumped her forehead against Shino's arm. Shino merely sighed and adjusted his sunglasses. "Physical discomfort aside, it is pleasant to see you safely returned from your training sabbatical." Naruto grinned. He'd missed Shino too. Uemino Iruka had already heard that Naruto had returned to Konoha. Konohamaru was bursting with the news from his grandfather that his eternal rival had finally returned to the village. But he himself was ambivalent about running into his former student. Of course, it would be great to see him again, and he wanted to hear all about his training trip. On the other hand, he was well aware that Naruto had kept quiet about Iruka's embarrassing acquisition. The news hadn't broken until a good 3 months after the boy had left. Someone noticed something on the tax receipts, and it was forwarded up the line, culminating in the single most embarrassing meeting with a Hokage of the young Chunin's career. Fortunately, Tsunade-sama possessed a sense of humor, and was willing to let him explain how the whole thing came about. Of course, it didn't help that she was clearly struggling to keep a straight face by the time he finished. She just asked him to let her in on the action next time. But the damage was already done. Yugao wouldn't even acknowledge his existence for the better part of a month, until Hayate-senpai explained that Iruka hadn't really done anything wrong. Worse were the reactions of his former students. Yamanaka Ino found the whole thing hilarious, and never missed an opportunity to bring it up. Inazuka Kiba had entirely the wrong idea, and worse, his older sister had taken to eyeing Iruka in a very unsettling manner. But no matter how things turned out, Iruka had to admit that Naruto had kept his mouth shut. And as a former prankster, Iruka knew sitting on something so juicy meant that he owed Naruto a favor. And the most unpredictable ninja he knew just had 6 months to think about it. Iruka knew nothing good could come of this, so he was resigned to his fate when he saw Naruto waiting for him after classes had let out for the day. "Good to see you back, Naruto," he said brightly. Obligations or not, the blonde terror still held a place in his heart. Even if he was likely to end up defacing the Hokage monument before the day was out. "Want to get some ramen?" Naruto asked. "My treat?" Iruka had faced death before on missions, so he suppressed the sudden spasm of fear with a stoicism born of hard experience. "Sure, what's the occasion?" he asked nonchalantly as they left the academy grounds. "Well, I'm back, and Kurenai-sensei said I shouldn't take advantage of people's generosity, so I figure I owe you more than a few bowls." Iruka frowned. He reached out and carefully laid a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "You know," while what she said may be generang. Naruto's head snapped around in surprise. It took no small amount of will for Iruka not to react. "Yuihi Kurenai was an excellent jonin," he said slowly, "and a great sensei. But she had her own ideas about things, and I don't think she was always right about everything. I wasn't just being generous, Naruto. If I offered to buy you ramen, it was solely for the pleasure of your company." He took a deep breath, noting Naruto's expression growing troubled. "I'm not saying you should question everything she said, but you should keep an open mind and make your own decisions, alright?" Naruto nodded as they continued walking. "I guess that's part of why I wanted to talk to you," he said after a moment. "I need some advice about something, sensei." Iruka was touched. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. "Naruto, I'm always here for you," he said quietly. Naruto nodded. "What is love? How do you know if you love someone? And what if one person loves someone that doesn't love them back?" Iruka stumbled. He realized that defacing the monument wouldn't have been so bad after all. Iruka picked at his pork ramen as he considered Naruto's dilemma. Part of him couldn't help being irritated at Yuichi Kuranai and the problem she'd dropped in his lap. From what he'd gathered, she'd spilled the beans to Naruto in some form of posthumous letter to be opened in case she died. He was familiar with the concept of dead mail. His own will contained a few sealed personal messages. One was even addressed to the young genin sitting next to him. But Iruka wondered why she would leave such a message without laying any groundwork for its comprehension. Maybe she'd planned to do so, but hadn't the time. However, such an oversight didn't really mesh with the unflinching realist that he remembered. It wasn't that she was a pessimist so much as she didn't believe things would work out in the end if she didn't make them. What would make her break the news to an unprepared Naruto? Everyone else who knew of Hinata's crush was willing to let it develop on its own schedule, to let her develop the courage to tell Naruto on her own. Looking at it that way made Iruka wonder what she knew that he did not. He sighed. Waiting wasn't going to make this any easier. Love is one of the strongest emotions people can feel, he began in a low voice. It happens when you care about someone so much that their well-being and happiness is more important to you than your own. It's a powerful force in people's lives. It can inspire someone to incredible heroics. It has also been the root of some of the most depraved evil ever committed. Iruka realized that he'd fallen into his lecturing cadence, but for once Naruto seemed totally focused on his words. As for how you know, it comes down to the definition I gave you. If you had to make a decision that would make you miserable, but would lead to her happiness, would you do it? I think so, Naruto mumbled. You need to know, Naruto, Iruka reminded him gently. Say, her family was relocating to Suna. Would you tell her to go with them, or ask her to stay in Konoha, even if you knew she would miss them? I don't think she'd want to go with them, Naruto replied. The certainty in his voice resounded with other things the Chunin had heard, or guessed. It was leading him to some unpleasant places. Assume she gets along with them better, Iruka suggested, and you know she would miss her sister horribly if they were parted. Naruto stared off into space, his miso ramen cooling. Suna is an ally again, so it's not likely we'd ever have to fight, he said slowly. Iruka was impressed that he'd considered that for a hypothetical exercise. I guess I could send a message to Gaara. Ask him if he and his brother and sister could watch out for her, he said slowly. Naruto's face was slowly crumpling into a study in misery, and Iruka was ashamed to realize he was a little shocked. I guess I'd tell her to go be with her family, the boy concluded. Iruka looked down at his food. He honestly hadn't thought Naruto capable of that depth of feeling. Clearly his former student was growing up faster than he'd realized. Well, it's a good thing that's not the case, he reminded his friend. Because if that's true, then you do have some deep feelings for her. But there's all kinds of love, Naruto. There's different kinds? The genin asked, clearly dismayed. Iruka nodded and took a bite of his cooling ramen. Don't you think a mother can love her child? Do you think that's the same kind of love she feels for her husband? Naruto shook his head. No, but this is more complicated than I thought. That's all right, Naruto, Iruka assured him. I think you've already done the hard part. You do remember the special seminar you attended with the other boys in your class? Naruto nodded, visibly shuddering. Good, Iruka said quickly. He gave a small grin. If I told the Hokage you'd forgotten, she would likely send you to refresher training. I wonder if that's something she'd assigned to her junior apprentice. Naruto's face turned crimson and he shot Iruka a look of pure betrayal. All right, Iruka replied calmly, so you do know she's a girl. Do you find her attractive? Naruto slowly nodded, still silent. Iruka frowned. What do you find most physically attractive about her? Take your time, and don't be crude, he warned. Naruto's face molded into a thoughtful frown. Finally he said, I like the way she moves, in little more than an embarrassed whisper. The way she moves? Iruka asked. Yeah, when she walks, it's like she's barely touching the ground, Naruto said, and when we spar, she's so graceful, it's like she's dancing and nothing can touch her, and then she lays a fingertip on you and boom. You've been juken blasted across the clearing. His words sped up as he warmed to the topic and found his voice. It's like that with everything she does. She can stick hunks of deer on a skewer when she's cooking, but when she does it she's so delicate and so precise. He lowered his voice. Sometimes I think I could watch her all day long. Iruka swallowed. He'd started this conversation worried that Naruto had never really noticed Hinata. Shows how much he knew. But it's not just physical, Naruto continued. It's like, she's graceful in everything. She doesn't want her friends to fight, so she's always playing peacemaker. She didn't want me to be embarrassed when we met Shino's parents, so she showed me exactly how to act. She doesn't want anyone to hurt, so she's always carrying around this bomb she makes for when we train. And now she's training to be a medic nin, because she's always trying to ease the path for others. She's amazing, he concluded. There was silence as they both looked away, then ate some more of their dinner. Finally, Iruka broke the silence. Naruto? Yes? Feelings may change over time, but I think it's safe to say that you love her. Oh, good. Thank you, sensei. Iruka nodded and patted his friend on the back. He couldn't really call him a boy anymore, could he? Naruto finished his ramen first, of course. He nodded to Haruka in a distracted manner before leaving enough money for both their meals and slipping away into the evening foot traffic. Haruka jumped a little when Tucci retrieved Naruto's bowl for the wash. "I heard everything with the burners turned off," he said, "nice talk." Haruka shrugged, a little embarrassed in spite of himself. As the father of a very pretty girl, Tucci said with some authority, "I wish every boy she meets had someone give them the talk you just did." Haruka didn't even try to stop the pleased flush that rose up his neck. Ushino wasn't surprised to see his teammate lingering near the boundary of the Aburame complex. He knew that Naruto was not on the mission rotation since his return, ostensibly so he could refamiliarize himself with Konoha and any changes that may have occurred in his absence. It was also entirely possible that his new teacher was in need of prolonged downtime interval of intensive instruction. If that meant Naruto had the opportunity to greet former comrades while Jiraiya went on a bender, he was not one to judge. His mother was more than up to the task. However, he had already spoken to Naruto at length the evening of his first day back. He had also witnessed a green blur that answered to the name, Naruto, during Guy's morning training sessions. Those facts left him unsure as to why his teammate would seek him out at this point in time. "Naruto," he greeted his teammate. "Hey Shino," the blonde replied in an unusually subdued tone. "Can we talk a minute?" "I was assigned to Team 10 today," Shino said, "so I am not in immediate need of sustenance or rest." His temporary teammates complained bitterly about Asuma becoming a slave driver after the Chunin exams. Shino, having experienced the madness of Guy, begged to differ. Naruto nodded, but Shino doubted he had fully processed the words. Something of serious import seemed to be occupying his comrade's mind. I've been doing some thinking," Naruto began. "An admirable occupation," Shino remarked in what he hoped was an encouraging manner. "About Hinata," Naruto clarified and Shino went very still. I'm pretty sure I like her." "Like?" Shino asked. "What is not to like? She is a skilled kunoichi with an extremely pleasant demeanor. Her training in medical ninjutsu will make her an extremely valuable comrade to have." No, Naruto interrupted, waving his hands, "not like that. I mean, yes, she's awesome, and I know she's been working hard in." "Then how do you mean it?" Shino asked, interrupting him back. I'm pretty sure I love her," Naruto said, looking down. Shino wondered if he was expecting some sort of approbation. "I see. How do you intend to make use of this revelation?" "I'm not sure," Naruto admitted. You're not mad?" "Why would I be angry?" Shino asked. "Well, I didn't know if maybe you liked her too," Naruto explained, shrugging his shoulders defensively. "While I hold our teammate in high esteem, and value her contributions to the group as a whole, I am not given toward fruitless pursuits," Shino replied. "Fruitless?" Naruto asked, clearly confused. "Are you aware of her feelings toward you?" Shino asked carefully. Naruto blushed and nodded. "I was aware of her preference from the start," Shino said. "As such, while I valued the friendship that developed, I knew that desiring anything more from her would be a hopeless endeavor." "You knew?" Naruto asked. "Naruto, I am fairly certain that everyone in our academy class knew," he clarified. "You all knew?" Naruto gasped. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Most did not feel it was their place," Shino explained. "Or they hoped Hinata would overcome her shyness enough to be able to tell you herself. Her feelings seemed to be fairly obvious, so many took it as proof that you were extremely clueless or simply did not care. I have since concluded it was more the former than the latter." Naruto sighed. "Shino, I grew up alone. I had to have Haruka-sensei explain to me, just now, how to tell if I liked her that way." Shino paused as he considered this. "That is not something I had fully realized the ramifications of, relevant to this situation. I can only offer that myself, like many others, hesitated to intervene because we feared to make an already uncomfortable situation worse." Naruto cocked his head. "You were worried about Hinata getting hurt? I guess I can understand that. So are we cool?" Shino nodded and felt the tightness in his shoulders relax. He had not even registered tensing up during this conversation, which he found odd. "What are your plans going forward?" he asked. "Well, I need to talk to Hinata," Naruto said. "Things have been messed up long enough because no one was talking. That needs to stop." Shino nodded. "I think she will be pleased at this course of action." Usunade leaned back in her chair as all of the active Jonin-sensei filed into the conference room. They were quiet, for the most part, so word had probably spread that this was going to be a serious meeting. When they were all in, the door shut. Tsunade stood as Jiraiya activated the room's security seals. "Jonin," she began, "we have a rare opportunity before us. The Raikage has extended a personal invitation for Konoha to attend the Kumo Chunin exams in 2 weeks. His offer is phrased as an offer to foster good relations after our own examinations were disrupted, but we think his primary objective is first-hand observation of our new crop of genin." "Then why give him a peek?" Kakashi drawled, not looking up from his book. His legendary tardiness was in steep decline after the last Chunin exam, and Tsunade knew when to pick her battles. At least his bad habits weren't interfering with training his team anymore. Her reports indicated the last Uchiha was also training on his own at an almost obsessive pace, but he wasn't completely leaving his teammates in the dust anymore. Deterrence, Tsunade replied with a smirk, and marketing. Kumo's best clients will be watching the finals. If our genin can make a strong showing, we can set the tone for interactions between Konoha and Kumo for the next decade. Won't the Raikage know this? Asuma asked, frowning. I've heard he's kind of a musclehead, but I've never heard him described as stupid. Our best psychological assessment, Nara Shikaku replied, indicates that he's more comfortable with known threats. He'd rather hand us a potential advantage if it reduces the chance of us blindsiding him in the future. That said, Tsunade continued, we need to make the most of this opportunity. I want every Jonin sensei to think long and hard. Do not nominate your team as a learning experience for them. Your teams did well in the last exam, but we want to make a show of strength. I only want teams that you honestly think can dominate the opposition. My brats are ready, Kakashi said. We'd have to lock them up if they found out they weren't going. I think Team Asuma will sit this one out, Sarutobi Asuma said. They're not all quite where I'd like them to be. I think Shikamaru is ready for the responsibility, but his tactical Ain won't play that well for a crowd of civilians. Shinobi would see too much. Tsunade nodded, ignoring the small sigh of relief she heard from Shikaku's direction. Maida Guy was next. Team Guy is more than ready to demonstrate the power of youth. Jiraiya cleared his throat, garnering the attention of many in the room. And I will nominate Team Jur. Ah, the hell with it. I nominate Team 8. Tsunade ignored the shocked, but approving looks her old teammate was getting. Very well. I'd like to inform you of another break from tradition. My predecessor, the Sandame, has petitioned to be allowed to take my place at the Kumo examinations. After due consideration of the security and political ramifications, I have decided to approve this petition. She was surprised to see Asuma look surprised. Evidently, Hiruzen hadn't even discussed this with his son, which impressed her a bit. Jiraiya was waiting for them as Guy-sensei was finishing his latest version of cool-down exercises. He strode up as their morning taijutsu practice ended. I need to see all three of you, the older man rumbled, then turned and left the training ground, clearly expecting them to follow. Naruto didn't say a word. He knew Jiraiya was not a morning person, and when circumstances forced it, better to not give the toad hermit any arguments. He led them to a small tea shop that was just opening. Naruto didn't know if the owner would have objected to his presence if he'd come alone. Fortunately, he wasn't the only person smart enough to not argue with a grumpy Jiraiya. The first cup of hot tea didn't seem to improve the older man's mood very much, but he started talking anyway. There's a mission. There's a Chunin examination coming up in Kumo in 2 weeks. The Hokage thinks you're ready. I think you're ready. If you think you're ready, we'll go there and out of everyone in your way and come back with 3 flak vests. He coughed and took another long sip of his tea. Are you up for it? I had to ask. Naruto and Shino turned toward Hinata, who was already nodding. They turned back and nodded as well. If you keep doing that in unison, I'm going to hurt you, Jiraiya groused. After they were dismissed, Naruto walked with Hinata to the Hokage's tower. She was just finishing her 6 months of indentured servitude to the Hokage, so this trip to Kumo had come just in time. Her break from living in the Hyuga compound was nearing its end, so she welcomed any excuse to postpone returning. She glanced over at her teammate. Naruto was unusually quiet today. In fact, after his first day back, he'd seemed rather pensive. She wondered what was bothering him. He'd appeared pleased about the Naruto protein special named in his honor. Had she done something wrong? So lost in thought was the Hyuga that she almost flinched away when she felt warm fingers wrap around her hand, interlacing with hers. She turned her head toward Naruto, who was looking away and blushing in a manner that she found absolutely adorable. And Naruto-kun? She asked, damming the quaver in her voice. I missed you, a lot, you know, when I was away, Naruto said, ducking his head and looking down. Hinata felt her heart hammering in her chest. She was amazed it wasn't drowning out her own voice. I missed you too, she managed to say. I'm not really sure how to say this, Naruto admitted, but I really like you. I like you too, Naruto, she replied without thinking. How had she done that so easily? Did he really mean it like it sounded? Naruto swallowed. Would you like to, date, I guess? I mean to say, would you like to be my, girlfriend? Naruto was obviously struggling with his words, and the last one came out as little more than a whisper. Hinata felt her eyes bulge as her face heated. She'd wondered, dreamed, even, about this happening. But now that it was happening, she felt her doubts multiply. Could she be a good girlfriend? What if her father found out? What if Naruto grew tired of her? Would she drag him down to her level? But as she hesitated, Naruto looked up, and she found herself lost in the blue of his eyes. She saw someone she knew was just as alone as she was, and she knew she could deny him nothing. Yes, I would, she said softly. Naruto pulled her into a hug, softer than his previous, more exuberant ones, and time seemed to stop. His warmth melted all her doubts away, so why did she feel like crying?